While Washington continues to hike tariffs on Chinese products, Angela Merkel is pushing for a European investment deal with Beijing. Not only that, she's banging heads together, reprimanding the American and Chinese on their trade war. In a first meeting with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang at Beijing's Great Hall of the People, Merkel said the dispute is affecting the whole world and hopes they'll resolve it soon. Li didn't seem too focused on his country's problems with the US, but with Germany, telling the Chancellor he hopes Germany will accept more Chinese companies and loosen export rules for certain goods. He went on to say that China promises to open up its economy even more. Well, China is becoming an even more important trading partner for the European Union. Since 2000, two-way trade has almost tripled, according to data from the European Statistics Office. Last year, the total trade volume between the EU and China was 605 billion euros. The bloc exported products worth more than 200 billion euros to China and imported nearly 400 billion euros worth of goods.
The German business view with regards to China could be summed up as one of huge opportunities coupled with huge challenges. One of the main worries is China's new social credit system. As well as its own citizens, the Chinese government also evaluates companies using a points system and penalises things it doesn't like. German companies fear it's becoming a method of blanket surveillance, and they say the system is neither clearly nor transparently regulated. The internet is also a bone of contention. Foreign companies in China still have complete access to the World Wide Web, but Beijing plans to introduce laws to curtail that, potentially shutting down Google or Twitter in China. And the old problems with fair play and market access are still prevalent. Despite repeated promises of improvement, German companies say they are still discriminated against in China. The chances for major concessions in these areas have never been as good. The trade war with the US has China under pressure. Economic growth there was at a record low in the second quarter, so there's a serious need for foreign investment.
Let's go over to Frankfurt for our financial correspondent, Uli Bartz. Which way do you see the Chinese economy headed? Is it becoming more open or more restrictive?
Perhaps just a little bit more open. I mean, the social credit system points to being more restrictive on the inside, but the Prime Minister said that he's willing to have more companies go in from the outside, from abroad, without having a joint venture partner as a prerequisite. But he's also indicating that that's not going to be a huge wave and not being applicable to everyone, but where needed. So it's becoming a little bit more open, but also more restrictive. But, you know, my guess is that it's not going to make much difference in the company's interest in going to China. It's such a huge part of their business. It's become that, and it's going to develop further. You just quoted all the numbers pertaining, for example, to Europe. And part of the deal that Merkel is going to be selling there in Beijing is a unit of the Deutsche Post, the world's largest logistics company, the street scooter, which makes little light transport vehicles electrically driven. Well, they're going to do it with a joint venture in China with automaker Chery.
I just can't imagine under this social credit system, Uli, that German companies will want to operate the way Beijing wants them to operate. I mean, we're talking 24-hour surveillance, putting in cameras in their companies' factories and offices to totally surveil what's going on, to keep workers under watch 5 days a week.
That's right. I haven't really heard much comment from business leaders on this. I can only imagine what it means to them personally and to their staff and to their companies to be under this kind of scrutiny. My guess is that they'll grin and bear it because there's so much at stake. If it becomes too much, I think the Chinese would be well advised to scale back because of everything that's at stake for both sides. Both sides can't afford to, let's say, hurt business over opposition to this system.
Talking about business, I just want to ask you one more question, Uli. Merkel says that the EU is open for business more than ever. Trump is calling on American companies to pull out of China. Couldn't her approach undermine his strategy of maximum pressure on Beijing to change the way it does business?
Well, I can only imagine what Merkel's words are doing to Donald Trump in the Oval Office. He's probably jumping up and down hearing that. But, you know, there's so many companies here in Europe and in Germany which welcome Chinese money. And I've heard comments from executives working in these companies that the Chinese do a very good job of staying out of the operative side and letting the Germans do what they do best. That's the reason why the Chinese invest. The thing is that, of course, it's not a level playing field, but there are a lot of family-run companies, Mittelstand, who don't have natural successors, and the Chinese, they pay a good dollar.
Let's talk more about this now with our chief political editor, Michelle Kuffner, and with DW's Beijing correspondent, Matthias Bollinger, visiting us right now in Berlin. Good morning to both of you. Michelle, we have Hong Kong protesters calling for Merkel's clear and unequivocal support. Will they get it?
Well, morally, they probably have it, but visibly what they've received so far is Angela Merkel once again, and that's no shift in position from the previous days predating that call by those protesters for the German Chancellor to make a statement that she hopes for a peaceful resolution. I have spoken to people in the room when Li Keqiang and Angela Merkel held their press conference, and that was asked at the very beginning whether Angela Merkel addressed this issue. She did, but I understand that that was a very tense moment with particularly Li Keqiang not really wanting to deal with the issue, in fact, skipping the question until with a slight satellite delay in that press conference. So clearly it's a very tense issue. It's been raised, but anybody who expects Angela Merkel to stand up and make a principled statement pro-demonstrations in Hong Kong will be disappointed, most likely.
Okay, that means the protesters, of course. Matthias, when we consider these tensions in the room that Michelle mentioned, what about China's reaction to the Hong Kong protests? Could they potentially overshadow this visit?
China is extremely sensitive about criticism from abroad in the Hong Kong protests, especially when Britain is concerned, or the US for several reasons. Britain as the former colonial power, the US as the main antagonist in other issues that we're going to talk about later, I think, the trade war namely. But any country that issues statements on Hong Kong will be met with the sentence that this is China's internal affairs. This is exactly what Li Keqiang said. So it's very sensitive, and Merkel has chosen to probably to say the most she could without offending the host.
Okay, now in the background is, of course, as you mentioned, Matthias, the global trade tensions, U.S.-China trade war. This meeting comes at a crucial time for the global economy. Just as economic experts say, the German economy is slipping into recession.
Yes, those first signs are certainly there. And the last place Germany and the whole of Europe wants to find itself is stuck somewhere in the middle as a territory for what could become a full-blown trade war between the US and China. And Angela Merkel will, of course, be very sensitive to that. For the third time, China has become the most important trading partner with 200 billion worth of trade volume there. And just to put it into perspective, the German budget is just over 350 billion euros. So China also needs Germany, that's for sure, particularly when it comes to questions of technology transfer. So both sides have a lot to lose and a lot to gain when they sit down and hold talks, particularly over economic cooperation.
Okay. That's exactly where Germany is, in the middle, because both sides are pulling on Germany, pulling it to its side. Germany agrees with China on that it is against Trump's policies, against Trump's strategies, tactics, the way he behaves. On the other hand, it has the same issues with China that the US have. China is still a very much closed economy. It does not give equal access to foreign companies. And the Germans are criticizing this. The only difference, or the major difference, between Germany and the US is that Germany wants to solve this in a multilateral environment, and the US goes for a unilateral strategy.
We have ongoing trade talks. We have new ones coming up next week in Washington. They're coming up soon. Could China make new concessions to end the trade war? Something Angela Merkel's calling for, certainly, a quick end. You know, could China back off a little bit and come to some kind of consensus with the US?
Well, at the moment, it looks as China is hardening. This might be a negotiating position. You don't negotiate when laying your compromises, what you would be able to do on the table. But I think China has also been frustrated with Trump's turns and turns around, and now is probably just hoping for the US elections to solve this problem and for the US voters to vote Trump out of office and restart the talks with a new administration.
Okay, they'll have to wait a while for that, though. Michaela, when you look at German concerns about China, there are very strong concerns about intellectual property and technology.
Yes, and Germany has lowered the threshold when the state starts looking into foreign investments, and that was specifically, although not officially, but it was quite clearly targeted at Chinese investments in Germany, particularly in high-tech companies. And there's a concern that that technology edge that Germany has in some areas could be lost. And once that is lost from the German side, Germany will simply no longer be so interesting for the Chinese, and that's something Germany is getting more protective about. At the same time, Germany wants to see multilateral engagement, and here we might be seeing a bit more of a new alliance almost, or certainly common ground between China and Germany in opposition to the United States.
For more multilateralism.
Yes.
Michaela Kuffner, Matthias Billinger, thanks so very much for coming in this morning.